Hello, Grace. This is paper 2, your paper about universal health care. Okay. The field that I'm going into is healthcare, as I am planning on becoming a nurse. One controversy that is prevalent in healthcare is the debate on whether or not there should be universal healthcare, specifically in the United States. Universal healthcare can be described as where all residents of a particular country or region are assured access to healthcare. I never even really thought about defining it before, but yeah, I guess that's what it means. There's pretty much only two sides to this argument, whether you support having universal health care or if you don't support it. Right. I mean, the people who don't support it have lots of reasons, but yeah, those are the two. You want it or you don't want it, yeah. Those who support it usually cite that it would help lower healthcare costs for the economy, allow doctors and hospitals to provide the same standard of care for a low cost, and eliminate administrative costs and the need to deal with private insurance. Well, that last one is the one I'm most familiar with, so maybe I'll learn something more about the others. Others argue that having a universal healthcare system forces healthy individuals to pay for others' medical care. Wow. People are mad that when they're healthy, they have to help their neighbor not die. Okay. Wow. Okay. Sorry, I was just kind of taken away by that. Others are having okay, tiny thing. Others medical care, so that medical care belongs to the others. This is just like an example I looked at in your first paper. So you need an apostrophe after others. Again, because the medical care belongs to others. The insanity. Let's talk about this for a second. The insanity of the fact that we put an S both for making plurals and also for showing possession in English is, like, as far as I'm aware, uniquely English annoyance, right? If you take in French or Spanish or I think pretty much any other language, they have other ways of, in French and Spanish, they'll say this is the desk of Miss Skirman. They'll say this is the dog of Miss Skirman, rather than this apostrophe S nonsense. So there's a good reason why. That trips people up sometimes. Okay. Others argue that having a universal healthcare system forces health. Oh, sorry. I got so derailed on people thinking it's cool to let their neighbors die. Okay, but that is upsetting, right? And that within most systems of universal healthcare, people report long waiting times for many elective procedures. Within most systems, I don't think you need the parentheses there. Just in general, looking at your papers today, I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like you have a little tendency to kind of over, like, maybe when you go back and revise, you're like, oh, but should I? Yeah, you don't need the apostrophes there. Most systems, if you want to make it smoother or, say, like, a little simpler, you could say that within, like, in countries with universal healthcare, people report long wait times for many elective procedures. I don't know. Okay. This paper will take a further look at some of the United States' attempts at healthcare coverage reform, a possible solution to the issue, and compare the pros and cons of another country's. Well, there's that apostrophe. The country system of universal healthcare. We'll see. It is all about the apostrophes with you. So here, the tiny issue. I'm glad this issue that you have is really, it's a very minor league issue. But here, when you say another, you have to have a singular thing after that, right? You can't say I ate a cinnamon roll and then I ate another cinnamon rolls. You can, obviously, but that's not. Another suggests that the word that comes after it, there's only going to be one of it. It's a thing you can count, right? So I had a cup of coffee, and then I had another cups. Okay, so that's probably just typo from you. But I like to explain why things are the way they are. So you can either say another countries and then it would just be singular with the Y apostrophe S, right? Or if you're going to talk about multiple ones, you say, I had a cup of coffee, and then I had other cups of coffee. So you could, if you're talking about more than one, we'd say other countries. So if you want to keep it plural, it would be other countries, exactly the way you have it there with the apostrophe. Or you can change the, you either need to change another to other, or change countries to a singular country. I hope that made some sense. Okay. The first article I read discusses the growing popularity of universal health care among low and middle income countries. It also addresses the question of whether a certain level of GDP is necessary to obtain effective universal coverage. Many countries have ultimately adopted these systems because they were looking to provide adequate and sustainable health care to their populations, and to help ensure. Is that quote from Feigelding also? I think we need a. Oh no, okay. I see it's down here. I just couldn't see it yet. Never mind. Help ensure equal access and opportunity to their people. While the United States was not one of those countries, in 2010 they did end up passing the Affordable Care Act into legislation. This overall hoped to provide easier access to health insurance for many by the year 2015. I don't know. I feel it's just a weird way to start that sentence. This overall, I mean, when you say this, I'm like, well, okay, I guess you mean the ACA and not legislation. Anyway, I think you can make that better. Okay. Many argue it has been successful in providing access to healthcare and other services for lots of people. However, there still remains many disparities within the system, given that its guidelines often exclude those who need its assistance most. Okay, so in this paragraph, we've had two places where I'm like, what? Tell me more. A certain level of GDP, like you mentioned that, but so far you haven't talked about it at all, and I'm still kind of stuck back there like, what about that part? I'd like to know about that. So I think either discuss that or leave it out. And then we've gotten to this place. It's been successful in providing access and other services for lots of people. I think it should be relatively easy for you to get some statistic from the internets that will reference like percentage of insured Americans or something like that, so that would be clearer. Because when you just move on to, there still remain many disparities within the system, given that its guidelines often exclude those. I kind of got lost there. Okay, I did get lost there. There remain many disparities, given that guidelines often exclude those who need assistance most. I want to hear about that, but excuse me, I need more information. Ultimately, no system for universal health care coverage has been implemented in the United States, and it still remains a prominent issue. Yes. Okay. Over the years, there have been attempts to implement some forms of universal health care legislation at both the state and federal levels. The next article I read argues that state legislation hasn't been any more successful than federal legislation issued in regards to universal insurance and healthcare coverage. Next article I read argues that state legislation hasn't been any more successful than federal legislation. I don't think you need to say issued in regards to universal healthcare and healthcare coverage. Like, we know what you're talking about now, I think. According to Gray, most of this began in 1974, when Hawaii passed the Prepaid Healthcare Act, the first employer-based insurance coverage system. Cool. I don't know anything about this. The next actions taken by states weren't until 1988-89, when Massachusetts and Oregon adopted universal coverage laws. Following that, there were many failed attempts at implementing legislation that were many failed attempts that were. It's so easy to mess that up when you have a longer sentence. But the attempts were. One attempt was, right? Okay. Many failed attempts at implementing legislation that were targeted to provide more widespread health care coverage among states. I feel like there's just an awful lot of words in that sentence that maybe we don't need. Let's see. Following that, Following that, there were many failed attempts at implementing more widespread healthcare coverage. I think that's all you need from that sentence. For example, in 1992, Vermont stepped to the forefront by committing to health access and adopting a global healthcare budget. By 1994, however, quote, legislative support for implementing the plan had evaporated, quote, due to a lack of public interest. The other thing I love about how good you are at sliding right into quotes is that because this is more science, because you're in the sciences, I'm much more okay with people writing in the sciences being a lot more according to the study, and not getting particularly fluid or flowy with their writing, because in science, honestly, I think people often prefer that it not be flowy. But so it's cool to see that you can do it so effectively. Okay, in science writing. On the other hand, there was one state that remained successful, and that was Minnesota. Really? Okay, sorry. Vermont committed to healthcare access, adopting a global healthcare budget. What does that mean? That confuses me. Legislative support evaporated. Okay, in Vermont. On the other hand, there was one state that remained successful, and that was Minnesota. Their healthcare coverage reform relied on managed competition to help lower costs and was focused on being able to extend healthcare coverage to uninsured adults and families. To this day, even, Minnesota boasts one of, quote, the nation's most expansive publicly funded health insurance programs. So now I'm so interested, why did it fall apart in Vermont? Taking a closer look, the following article details one state's approach to healthcare reform. In 2006, the Affordable Care Act was signed into law in the state of Massachusetts. In the couple of years prior to this, healthcare costs were escalating rapidly. These escalating costs had ultimately driven insurance premiums to an all-time high in Massachusetts. So this act was issued as a response to this situation. I feel like it makes more sense to me to talk about the cause and then the solution. This felt kind of awkward to me to be like, they did this. Oh, and by the way, here's why. Okay, this act included an employer mandate which helped increase employer-provided health coverage where fines were levied against employers who didn't comply with this. You can just say against employers who didn't comply, period. Because we know what they didn't comply with. You just talked about that. Okay, another part of this was the creation of an independent state agency called the Massachusetts Connector. Some responsibilities of the Massachusetts Connector included overseeing and establishing methods for supplying inexpensive health care, also including those who are ineligible for Medicaid. This especially focused on providing health care coverage to those who earn less than 150% of the federal poverty level. Also, for those earning less than 300% of the federal poverty level, subsidized products known as the Commonwealth Care products were made available. These products were modeled after existing Medicaid products and were meant to be offered to support a wider range of individuals. Yeah, that sounds a lot like what Obamacare ended up being. Lastly, I read a possible solution to this controversy. This article suggests a possible hybrid solution to having a system of universal healthcare in the United States. As of 2007, when this article was published, 15.9%. Oh, I'm going to need to make 2 videos. So let me stop here, and in the next one, I'll go back to this paragraph.